Or do what do you want to do? Oh, okay. Good morning, everyone. Thank you. All right, we're about ready to get started. So I don't know where to stand. Good morning. So I'm just going to share a few slides with you and some comments to start our morning off. And then we've got a couple other things lined up right afterwards. So this will be a great morning, and we appreciate your attendance and your attention. So thank you for being here. So my name is Judy Littlejohn, and I'm the chair of Fact 2 this year. And I'm really happy to be here in Buffalo, which is close to me because I'm down the thruway in Elba. How many are from Elba? Okay, represent. So I'll stop that now. But here is my presentation. I guess that's not going to do it. And I'm stuck on this one, but here comes Jeremy. I don't know what happened. Okay. Excellent. So is that working now? I just go push down. Okay, so I wanted to start. This is a little bit about interpersonal communications. And one thing I was thinking about was I teach, so my role on my campus, which is Genesee Community College, is director of online learning. But I also teach history online as an adjunct. And I get emails from students, and they don't seem to know much about my class when they're asking me questions, right? Like they don't seem to know who I am or some of the policies. And so they ask a lot of clarifying questions. And I think, why don't our students know our names? Or if they come into the office to talk to one of our specialists, they might want to say, oh, you know, that English teacher, but they often can't name their teacher. And sometimes you think, usually when you register, you're kind of checking out the faculty and selecting who you want, but for some reason around week 5, 6, or 7, you sort of forget their name. But why is that? So my premise here is that maintaining interpersonal relationships is crucial for student engagement and success. And you'll see, so some of the material I have in here is drawn from Tracie Addy's work, and she's here today, and Derek Bruff's work, and he'll be here tomorrow. So I was trying to tie in a couple different themes from the conference into one really quick presentation. So think about that. So I think, but the challenge can be, especially, you know, in our where I am, the totally online world, is that people who are over reliant on technology can start to feel isolated, right? You've got so many computers and gadgets and all the little gizmos and things that you're working on all day. You're kind of by yourself and surrounded by all these things. And sometimes, you know, I sit at my desk and people can't see me behind the monitors. And, you know, I'll say, I am here, but so we can self-isolate, maybe sometimes intentionally, but sometimes I think people get comfortable with their technology, rely on it more and more, and start to feel isolated. And so here's my image of that. That's from Midjourney. I kind of like that. It's supposed to be a student isolated by technology. So the theme of our conference today is creating inclusive innovation in higher education. And when the committee started talking about this, like back in September, and I was confused by that title because I really didn't get it. And then finally in April, Chris Price, is Chris in here? wave if he's over there. Hi, Chris. He made a comment. He said, innovation that leaves people behind is not sufficient. And that's when it clicked for me, like, oh, I get it now. I understand what we're talking about. We want to create inclusive innovation. And for some reason, it all came together for me. And I thought that this quote really crystallized it, and I wanted to remember it and wrote it down. And I told him I was going to say it today, but I was so glad to finally think, okay, I know where we're going now. I get the point. So back to the isolated student. So one solution to help the student not feel so isolated by technology is to blend traditional teaching methods with technology and ensure that personal interactions are maintained. And that comes from one of Derek Bruff's publications. So that makes sense, right? So we're going to blend our technical work with maybe, different conversations and things that we can do in a more interactive way. And Tracie said in one of her publications that another solution is to create opportunities, intentionally create these opportunities for face-to-face interaction through your office hours, or I call them student hours, or different group projects. And if you're on campus, you can do in-class activities and ensure that students are interacting with each other, they're interacting with you, and they're not isolated. So in general, I think to meet the diverse needs of the students, we want to use our technology intentionally, foster those personal connections, create the balanced, inclusive environment, and implement ongoing reflection and adaptation. I think Tracie talks a lot about the reflection and adaptation. So we want to be nimble, right, or agile, so we can change what we're doing to meet the needs of the students that we have right now. So look at this one. How many have gotten this in the email? So, so how do you feel when you see that? How do you feel when someone hopes their email finds you well? So this is kind of how I feel. And this is from last year's presentation, if anybody remembers that. So I think that we all get this, right? You get this form email, but it might be from somebody who really is trying to tell you something important, but they're using AI because they're trying to be efficient and they didn't proofread it or modify it in any way to personalize it. So you're thinking, well, if this is so important, really, couldn't you just take that minute? Couldn't you just put you in it and make me aware that you're talking to me? So I was thinking a little bit more about myself and things that I do in my life, right? So I read books on Kindle. Do people read books? Any other Kindle users? These are my fun books, like my novels, my relaxation books. And I always look at the top. It's always the title of the book, and then whatever page you're on and whatever percentage you're on. But who wrote the book? Because the only place you see that is when you first open that book. And they never show it again unless you intentionally drag your percentage bar back to 1 or, start on the cover again. I don't remember the authors like I used to when I'm carrying my books around. So I binge watch Netflix, Acorn, Disney Plus, lots of things. But what the heck did I just watch? I can tell you the plot. I may or may not know what some of the actors' names. I know that I enjoyed it, but I don't know what it was. Does that ever happen to anybody else? Yeah. Not so much. I'm not a big movie watcher because, in 90 minutes it's gone. I don't have that time to waste. But I like series, so I can watch, series 1, 2, 3, and 4. So especially the ones that go on forever. And I feel like they're part of my family and they're in the background and I'm doing other work and I like to have the show on, but I don't know what it was called. So recently, some letters were published, or more letters that Emily Dickinson wrote were published. And with a lot of emphasis on how she signs off on her letters. And I loved some of these. So she'd write her letter and say, with alarm, your scholar. Like what, clearly personalized, thoughtful. This is what I'm talking about to you with sweet respect. I've never received a letter with sweet respect. But so I think I would look at that and think about the intentionality of that. And what are you really saying to me? And the third one, you're rascal. I washed the adjective. I love this. I'm going to try to wash my adjectives. Like, I'm a swearer. If you don't know that. That may or may not happen here. I'm going to try to wash my language better, wash my adjectives. But that's just phenomenal. So what, you get a real sense of how she felt at the end of this email, or end of the letter that she was writing. And, love for all but the rheumatism. So I had read these in an article and thought about it. And then I was recently sending an email out to all the online faculty. And so I signed it like, ever grateful. And I was sincere. And it wasn't AI, it was me. And I don't know if people read the whole email. I don't know if they get that far or if they ever give it a second thought. But I hope they know that, I was truly thinking about them and writing to them intentionally in an interpersonal way and hoping that they feel welcome to reply to me if they want to. And look at how I put like me and Emily Dickinson on one slide. Little arrogant, I'm sorry. But so then from that, I'm thinking about all these different things. Like, I don't want to be isolated. I want to be interpersonal, and thinking about what happens in the office with our professional interpersonal relationships. And, so we can, when we're all like doing the teamwork thing and we all have close, we start to know each other pretty well. We can do all these things, share our insights, brainstorm, collaborate, innovate, communicate, and problem solve. And the work day, the work week, the work environment is so much better, right? When we have interpersonal connections, whether they're in Zoom, whether they're in person. But as we start to know each other, we can really expand on these things that we can do. So then in general, I thought, how do we want to be addressed? Thinking back to that, I hope this email finds you well. Or sometimes I get, hey, professor. Or I get, I just recently this spring, I had a student, every time he wrote me an email, he wrote, Little John. And I wanted to say, yo, like, yeah, what's up? And then thinking about the emails and announcements I send out, how do we want to be responded to? I want people to read what I wrote and understand that I meant it, that I was thinking about them and it's intentional. And so why would our students want anything different, right? They want to know you're hearing them, you're talking to them, you're thinking about them in an interpersonal way. So I thought, well, we should all do that, right? We should communicate with our students on an interpersonal level. But what about this? What's up with that? So why don't our students know our names? If you're sending that backslide, do you know theirs? That's my whole message here. So think about that. And on that note, I do want to share before I go a gift to everyone. It's not from me, though. It's from the AI task group. Jeffrey's here. Who else is here from the AI task group? Lots of people. Lots of people. So take a look, guys. Published yesterday. So scan away. And I'm all set. So thank you for your time. Okay, and next up is from D2L, Cody Ellis. He's got a few words to say to you. Okay. Is everyone done scanning? You want to leave it up? Okay, he said you can leave it. You can leave that up. Thank you.
All right. So I was here last year. I'm very excited to be here again this year. It was a lot shorter drive for me. It was only 2 hours versus 4.5 hours, I think. So thank you for putting it in Buffalo. I appreciate it. So there's been a lot of changes over the last year with the DLE, with D2L, with SUNY. And I'm here just to kind of highlight a few things, some things that we're excited about at D2L and that we've seen the SUNY DLE team be excited about. So I want to share, we started everything in January of 2022, where the first cohort started going, like moving everything online. It took, so 0 people were in D2L at that time. Now, end of 2022, cohort 1 completed their implementation. So congratulations to everyone that was in cohort 1. You guys have now been in D2L for well over 1.5 years now. Now, May of 2023, when I spoke last year, cohort 2 had finished their implementation. So that was super exciting. We had 2, so we were halfway there. We at D2L were very excited. I know the SUNY DLE team was very excited because they're like, hey, we're almost there, we're halfway. December of 2023, cohort 3 and cohort 4 had finished their implementation. So everyone was done. You guys have now implemented D2L across all of SUNY, and that is a big round of applause for everyone. So congratulations. Thank you. So just kind of like riding on the AI wave. AI didn't implement D2L, just be very clear. This was the SUNY DLE team. This was each campus stepping up and doing the work that you all did to accomplish that. It's not easy. There's probably a lot of tears, happy tears, sad tears, maybe some more tears than what you would normally expect because it's a lot of work. Like, who found it was a lot of work switching systems? There we go. All right. So only a couple people in here thought it was a lot of work. We know it was a lot of work because the amount of messages that we got at D2L internally of how much work's going into this and how much effort's going, how much thought was going into it. How do we set it up? How do we want to make sure it's like going to go well for all, is it 54, 64? Thank you. I was like, I knew it was a 4. All 64 institutions, like that is a ton of work. So congratulations there. Now, I'm just going to call out Dan Freiberg. Thank you for the SUNY Online book. This gives me a lot of stats I get to use, so I appreciate that. So just to give a little bit of perspective, we have 54 campuses in the DLE in production right now. We had 436,000 courses over in D2L. That's a lot of courses. You guys teach a lot. There is over 500,000 student accounts. Now, just to be clear, that's part-time students, that is like professional development, like faculty teaching as well. So like, it's not just like your 370,000 FTE that you have, it's all the part-time and everything like that as well. So over 500,000 people logging into D2L on a regular basis. That is a lot of people coming in. So congratulations there. 56,000 faculty accounts. That's a lot of faculty. So kudos to all the non-faculty members, all the admins that have to keep track of all the faculty and have to work with all the faculty. So that's a lot of work from your end. So thank you for being involved there and working with the SUNY DLE and D2L to make sure you're enabled as well. And then just to end, this is probably, I wanted to bring in a SUNY story. So last year I was at the University of Buffalo for a short visit. I was with Mark Woodard. I don't know if Mark's in this room or if he's busy somewhere else, but we had come on, we did a couple of conversations, and then I lost my phone. I didn't know where it was. I'd walked out to the car, and we had ended like right at 4 o'clock, like right when it ended. And I'm like scrambling. I'm like, where is my phone? No idea where it is. So one of my colleagues, they call Mark, like, Mark, are you still at University of Buffalo? He's like, yes, I am. Okay. I'm like, perfect. Okay. So we go back into the building. The building's vacant. Like, no one's in the building. No students are in the building. Like, it is empty. I'm like, how am I going to get my phone if I have no idea where it is? And then I don't, like, no one can open up any door for me because all the doors were locked as well. So there's Mark, and he's walking around trying to find some janitorial staff, trying to find some like assistants somewhere. And I'm like pulling up my phone, like my watch. I'm like, hey, how can I ping my phone to figure out where it is? So we figured out where it was, figured out where my phone dropped. I'm like, okay, perfect. Like, I found my phone. I know where it is. We go up to the room. The door's locked. 10 minutes later, we're like walking around just aimlessly, like in the buildings here. Like, we need someone to open up a door. We found someone. They called their boss. They called their boss. And we finally get keys to the room. Finally go and get my phone. I'm like, hey, now I can go to the SUNY CIT conference. We're good to go. I can now start driving because I actually have my phone and I know I have directions I can actually follow. Long story short, AI couldn't do that. I needed people. I needed someone that was willing to help. I needed someone that was willing to be supportive and take the time out of their day to offer their support. And AI just doesn't do that like real humans do. And what you have done at SUNY and what you have been able to do as an entire system, as individuals, is similar to what Mark did for me. Like, you all are willing to help others. You're willing to be supportive. The SUNY DLE is willing to be supportive to each of the administrators across all the campuses. And then all of the administrators are being willing to help all the faculty who have that anxiety or have that need for support. And the fact that that's like all across SUNY is leaving a lasting impression for so many students. So it starts with you as the admins, you as the faculty, and you as the SUNY leaders, to then just keep pushing that down because the students have a lasting impression based on the experience that you all are giving them. So, and the fact that D2L can be supportive of that, we appreciate it. And we're excited to continue this partnership with you all. And I look forward to coming back next year and hopefully having a better story than I just told today. So thank you all.
No, I'll use it. Thank you, Cody. That was good. So now it is my pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker for CIT 2024, Dr. Tracie Marcella Addy. Dr. Addy received her BS from Duke University, a Master's of Philosophy from Yale University, and a PhD from North Carolina State University. An accomplished academic leader and higher education partner, Tracie is a published scholar of teaching and learning, educational development, and learner-centered practices. Dr. Addy's work has been featured in a variety of academic journals and venues, such as Inside Higher Ed and University Business. She has been an invited guest on a number of podcasts, including Teaching in Higher Ed, T for Teaching, Teaching for Student Success, and Dead Ideas in Teaching and Learning, as well as a lead author of the books, What Inclusive Instructors Do, Principles and Practices for Excellence in College Teaching, and Enhancing Inclusive Instruction, Student Perspectives and Practical Approaches for Advancing Equity in Higher Education. She currently holds the position of founding director of the Institute for Teaching, Learning, and Inclusive Pedagogy at Rutgers University in New Brunswick, New Jersey. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Tracie Marcella Addy.
Thank you so much, Judy. And it's wonderful to be with you all, for this conference. I was very excited to be able to speak about a topic that's near and dear to my heart. For the last several years, we've been really doing a lot of research, thinking about inclusion. And just to bridge it with what you're talking about, throughout this conference is a great opportunity. So today I'm going to take us on a journey, and what I'm hopeful for is that it actually helps you think about some of the work that you're thinking about with regards to innovation in a different way, or it builds upon some things that you already are thinking about with regards to inclusion. I will bring in a little bit of our work, like our scholarship and whatnot. And then we'll also have opportunity for you to reflect. Okay, so I do like active engagement and learning. How can I promote it, with our teaching and learning and not do it in the talks that I do? So I do have a couple of opportunities where you'll also be able to do that, to apply the information. So you can feel free to access the actual slides. You can see the QR code here. I don't think my little clicky's not working. It doesn't seem like for me. So let's see. Let me see if I can advance the slides this way. Okay, maybe I can have you figure that out. Thank you. Perfect. Okay. So for our journey today, I'm going to just talk about essential questions when I think about inclusion, and when hopefully you all think about inclusion with regards to innovation or anything that we do, okay? And then I'm going to kind of present these three approaches. They embed a lot of, various aspects of various dimensions of thinking about good teaching, and in general, thinking about inclusive teaching. So we're going to spend a lot of time on these approaches and apply them in a variety of ways. And at times, as I mentioned throughout, we'll have moments where you'll reflect. So we want to make sure that you're taking in this in ways that are meaningful to you. So we'll have those opportunities as well. So that's the journey that we'll take today. Anytime I think about inclusion, and I'll tell you a little bit about some of the work I've done. As the director of the center at Lafayette College, before now transitioning to Rutgers, I did a lot of work with faculty on inclusive excellence and inclusive teaching. So I ran a number of academies that focused on inclusion, both for departments, so I worked directly with departments, or individual instructors, whatever their goals were, helping them think about inclusion in the ways that will really support their students, all the way to implementation. Some of the work that we do also involves students as pedagogical partners. And so you'll see this kind of emerge from some of the things that we'll talk about today, why student voice is critical in inclusion, okay? And so hopefully that's one point we'll take home. But what I wanted to share with regards to some of the things I've been working on is some of the ways that I've taught faculty to really think about inclusion. While we want to, teach our courses, we want this content, we want students to learn, et cetera, do we ask these questions, in the design of an activity, in the implementation of our pedagogies, right? All the things that we do, who could be excluded, right? Who is this excluding? And as a result of that, really reflecting on that, how can this innovation be carried out in ways that are inclusive? So if you think of any questions to ask yourself around inclusion, from wherever you're at, from course design to implementation of whatever approaches you're using, those are two essential questions that we'll also hammer in. So I wanted to present a couple of ways of thinking about this moving forward. So we have these questions that we ask ourselves as we're engaging in this process of thinking about innovation, but we also have to really think in various dimensions around it. First, and I'll start with the top one, do we center student learning and engagement? There's all these shiny things that we can do. Generative AI, as was mentioned, virtual reality, all of this, right? And they all can be great on their own, but is learning our focus, or really is it to play with something fun, right? So we always have to think about centering learning and engagement, and we'll talk a little more about that. The other aspects are being responsive to who your learners are. So who's in your institution? Who's in your department? Who's taking your courses? Who are your students? And I'll share a little bit of the work that we've done with that, okay? Especially at the course level. Oops, let's go back. And then lastly, I mentioned this idea that students need to have voice. And it's not to say that students are going to dictate everything we do, but we really need to bring them in as critical partners. So the other aspect we'll talk about is co-creation. How do we co-create with learners and invite their feedback on any innovation, okay? So sometimes we think so carefully about us designing it. What about our students? Are we involving this process? They're the ones learning, right? Absolutely. So the first, as I mentioned, center student learning and engagement. We have these great frameworks, right? Backward design of instruction. We start with our, learning objectives, our learning outcomes, and what we want students to achieve, et cetera. Everything that we do when we innovate should center that. Should center how are we going to help our students learn? How are we going to engage them in the process of learning? If that's not there, we really shouldn't be doing it at all, right? We're talking about teaching and learning here. So this is critical. And I think everybody can kind of resonate, that can resonate with most people, right? It should center learning. Whatever innovation that we do should center learning and engagement. And engagement, that's a broad term, right? What does that mean? Involving students in some way in their learning process. Okay, and that's how I'm conceptualizing it today. So we need that. In addition, the second aspect that I mentioned that I'll spend a little bit more time on is being responsive to who our learners are. And I know that the SUNY system, you have institutions that are very different, right, with regards to your student populations, right? And so who you're teaching is going to vary contextually. So we have to think about at the institutional, departmental, or whatever unit you have level, as well as at the course level. Now, we've spent a lot of time at the course level too, but I've absolutely worked with departments. We've thought about institution-wide kind of implementations when we think about innovation. So going there, I did look up, SUNY does have a nice dashboard. You can go to different institutions and to really think about who's in the system. I mean, it's a huge system, right? Like that you're working in. There's a lot of students. So you can see basically the demographic backgrounds, right, of the system, as well as pull out your particular campuses and really get a sense of some of the demographics of students. What are they bringing into your actual spaces? So going from thinking about who's there with regards to socioeconomic class, we think about gender identity, racial, ethnic identity, first generation students, who's there, right? Who's at your institution? That's critical information for any innovation, because it's going to impact them in various ways, right? So we need to know who our students are at our institutions. So this is where we'll take the first reflective exercise now so that you can make this more meaningful to yourself. What I'd like you to do is think about your institution's student demographic backgrounds. Who's coming to your institution? Stay at that level. Don't stay at the level of courses yet. Stay at the institutional level. And I'd like you to basically think about how does that implicate these innovations? And as you're thinking about them in the conference and things that you're doing as instructors or as working with instructors, how is that implicated? How are their backgrounds implicated? So I'd like you to either share with someone next to you, if you'd like, or reflect quietly. And then I'd like us to come together and share, okay, for a few minutes. So I'm going to give you some time to do that. So think about your demographics of your students and share with somebody, or if you'd like, sit quietly, reflect.
Well, when you have the same.
All right, if you're talking with someone else, just make sure you switch if the other person didn't get a chance to share yet.
Like, think about how we did. There's that whole committee that to look at all the elements. Hospital and everybody was involved in that, you know, I think they knew all that. That's bad.
Oh, sure. All right, we'll do one more minute. So one more minute, and then we'll come back together again. It's great to hear all the discussion.
Like in the town recently, trees capitalized by tier one research. I think it doesn't really include undergraduate. It's better born. Yeah, part of preparing as much as possible, but.
Yes, that'd be great. Thank you so much.
These students aren't even necessarily full, if they need for college. And when they do go, and it's possible, and they have problems with it, they can't come to court.
Okay, let's come back together again. I heard a lot of great discussion, some reflection, hopefully thinking about who your learners are and widely, broadly at your institution. So are we all set? Okay. So I know that you have these beautiful little microphones. So I'd like to see if a few people would share. I saw a hand in the back. Would you like to share? No? Did you have your hand up? Oh, okay. Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that. Yes, I see a hand in the back. Would you like to share a little bit?
Oh, it works. Excellent. Something that happens in our community college that we notice is we have two-factor authentication on everything. And we're literally assuming that our students have a smartphone and they can use two-factor authentication to get into their other device. And we had a whole discussion about it that was really eye.
Yeah, no, that's a great example, right? Like, so we don't even realize, well, who has a smartphone or who doesn't, and how does that lock students out? It like actually is preventing them access. So thank you so much for sharing that. Can you share which community college you're at?
I'm at Jamestown Community College.
Great, thank you. I'd like to hear some other, yes.
So this actually doesn't do with technology, but and some of us in different sections have been using it.
Oh yeah, do you have the mic? There's the little black mic there. Oh, there it is. It's blocking the bag. Great, thank you. Perfect. No worries.
I was saying that this doesn't have anything to do with technology, and it's something that others may have experienced during sessions this week. But we noticed that in many of our classrooms, the desks are not equitable. So in our classrooms, we have the flip. I know they have.
They flip up and yeah.
But And there was always one desk in the front right corner where someone with a disability could
Mhm.
sit, which first of all pointed them out.
Mhm.
But what about those with hidden disabilities?
Mhm.
And if I am not quote unquote average size,
Mhm.
how do I fit in that desk and put all of my class materials on this little flip down?
Mhm.
So we went through our physical plan, myself and someone from IT. We literally went through every single classroom on every building in campus
Mhm.
and implemented changes to the furniture.
Mhm.
And so that they would be tables like this with feet casters and things like that.
Absolutely.
So if I walk in a classroom, I can fit.
Yeah, yeah. No, absolutely. I mean, you know, that's so essential for students in your classes, right? Even the actual space itself and the things that are in the space, right? Desks, et cetera, that they actually are accessible to them in various ways, because that can hinder their learning, right? That can interfere with their experience. Great. Okay, we'll take another one in the back.
So I actually could use your help on this one. My college that I am at is a community college, but we have 3 separate locations for the same community college. But we range from, I'm from Long Island, so we range from out in the Hamptons where every child or every student has access, and you don't have to ask. And then the other 2 campuses, one's kind of mediocre, and then the other one, 99% of the students don't speak English.
Mhm.
So if you're a professor like me who teaches on all 3 campuses,
Mhm.
I don't know but to assume that you have access. And then I found out my students don't know where to ask
Mm.
for computers, where to ask for money to get technology and things like that. So if I'm teaching an online course, I don't know which campus you're at because you're on an online course campus.
Mm.
So my question to you is, when you have a demographic that is so broad in range, and you're a professor who is just trying to teach the material, you're not allowed to ask the students, do you have access? You're not allowed to ask them, do you need help? Like, you have to kind of go around it and let them come to you. Due to privacy, we're told, clean, like straight out, you're not allowed to ask.
Mhm.
So how do you do that? Like, we are not a campus of broadcasting, with flyers. We have this program, we have this help for you, come get it. How do you go around it without violating privacy?
Yeah, those are really good questions. I mean, every campus is going to have their own rules and policies, and we'll actually talk about that a little bit more. Some of the work that we've done to also support students and understanding that they're coming from a variety of backgrounds, and there's certain things that it'd be important for you to know as an instructor, right, to be able to support them in their experience. So I'm probably going to get to that actually a little bit more later, and I'll bring up some of the things that you talk about because we've done some work around this with regards to at the instructor level, like course level, but we also have done some work at some of my institutions with just the kind of the understanding of who's like kind of students are and having support resources, more institutional kind of wide things. So let's hold on to that and we'll talk about it. I'm going to relate it back to some of the things I'll share. Thank you for sharing. These are great. Okay, so I'm going to actually just move on a little bit about thinking about who's in your department, who are the students that come to your department or your unit. So we know that our departments are kind of microcosms of like who's in our institution. So it's going to be reflective of that diversity, potentially in some ways, but there are also distinct things to think about. In addition to the demographic backgrounds of students, what are their background knowledge and skills? How can that interfere or interact with the implementation of your innovation? What are their experiences? What are their academic interests? So this is when we go down a little bit deeper to really think about, right, who our students are in our departments themselves. And then where I'm going to get to, and actually this came up a little bit earlier, is at the course level. So when we think about innovation in the course level, and when we think about inclusion in general and good teaching, we really want our courses to be accessible. We talked about that a little bit, equitable and culturally relevant, right, for all of our students. So when we think about like what our instructors have said, and this is actually drawing from some of our work and what inclusive instructors do about what they do, and this is actually getting to the point that was made earlier a little bit. I know that, you know, there's privacy issues, et cetera, but let's hear some voices from some instructors. So I include informal surveys of their cultural background, the students, work experience, their education, the languages spoken, their preferred foods, music, reading, sports, their family education, and so on. Do any of you do that? Maybe some actually do that, okay, in this space. Generating activities through the semester to find out more about my student audience, their career interests, their misconceptions about different topics, how their cultural, geographical, and generational experiences inform their own interests, their perceptions of future career goals, and self-evaluation. So some things that we found with instructors who we called inclusive instructors that we studied through our research is that some of them were just trying to find out who their learners were. And this kind of gets up to the points that we talked about earlier. They use that information in ways that help them design their instruction, their courses, you know, which inclusive teaching practices that they choose. Let's actually hear from a few students now looking a little bit differently at this lens. So this student says, and this is one where the instructor may be using some various approaches, you know, that are inclusive, but this particular student doesn't feel like they can engage. I think there are a few activities that are supposed to be fun, but assume a certain ability that I don't have visually. Something like counting off to 10, find your group, are actually very overwhelming and not fun for me. So we talked about students, also students with disabilities. A student actually that we studied and for our second book that just came out had a disability, right? She has a sensory disability. And so in the reality, if we designed some of these innovations in ways, we could exclude her, right? And she actually just talked about that, right? In a lot of the conversation that we had with her. So we need to think carefully about that, you know, as well. For college marching band course, we had a blind student join, and this is another example of students with disabilities. The primary instructor took great care to ensure he had readable music, inverted colors, white text on black page. I bring these two examples up because it's really critical when we're thinking at the course level that we know who our students are, that we know they're students, right, that could have some kind of challenges with what we're designing in terms of our innovation. And we need to think about how do we approach that? How do we approach that in ways that are inclusive? So some of the work that we've done is on, and this is actually in What Inclusive Instructors Do. It's in that book, but it's also open access because we published a research article on it separate. I guess out of a desire to just, you know, frustration, and I think, you know, this was expressed earlier, of how do we get to know our students early on so that we can actually use this information in helpful ways? So I had this, you know, my own frustration with that. And I was like, well, why don't we really think about what kinds of tools will also help us understand the diverse assets that students bring and use those and be responsive. So birth was our Who's in Class form, which resonates with some forms that instructors might use, as I mentioned earlier, some quotes from our inclusive instructors in their course. We co-created this particular form with students. So we asked them, what would you feel comfortable answering? What would you want your instructor to know? And we also use staff, I included staff members, instructors, et cetera. We decided that, and this is also based on the feedback from students, to make it anonymous. So actually we, you know, might have, and instructors might have, this is what they often do, something where they actually get information that's not anonymous, but some of the things on this form are kind of, you know, can be very private. Students might want to share them at the beginning of class. So basically, the Who's in Class form has a bunch of different questions on it. And so getting at some of the things we talked about earlier, if we make it anonymous, we make it voluntary, right? Students can or cannot use it. And I'll tell you that, we see high response rates when it's implemented. Typically at the beginning of the semester, we see, 80 and up, response rates. But here are some of the sample items. I work on or off campus. How many hours do I work? I have a laptop or a desktop computer. I'm financially capable of purchasing the materials. I'm a first-gen student. My expectations for inclusivity. And again, you can access this particular form if you'd like. So what we ended up doing, and it seemed to be fairly valuable, was actually working directly with instructors who use this form. So we'll say, as our center will support you in, kind of putting it as a survey. They wanted it to not be written, so the students can't be identified at this point. And you can implement it, you administer the survey to your students. And then when you get the results, the instructor only sees them in aggregate. They don't see like individual results, again, out of the comfort of students feeling comfortable sharing this information. So they get a report, and that report they use at the beginning of their course to really think about who's in their class. And we'll work with them in the center and talk about what could you do? Like, how can you be responsive to this diversity? What do we find when we do this? We find that instructors are like, oh my goodness, I didn't know my students work so much. Oh my goodness, what am I going to do? My students can't access, like, they don't have a laptop or something like that. And they've thought about some of these things and they're like, well, we need to figure out how do I, what do I do about this? And so we devise strategies for them. We work with them. And sometimes, instructors, they've been using us many times. They've seen a lot of different things, so they know what to do. And that information has been really helpful for them to really design more inclusive courses. And what I'll say is that we looked at some of the data for this. So first off, the students in general are very positive about it, but we did ask the instructors, a small group in our first implementation, was this a good form? We asked them various questions on it. Would you use it again? So this was 10 instructors, 20 courses that they taught. 93% thought the form was helpful. Okay, so of all those instructors, 86% when implemented again, 79% felt the form helped them be more inclusive in their teaching. And I always talk about this in an interesting way because that particular metric there, when you look at like the data and who said, yes, no, it didn't help me be more inclusive, oftentimes it was one example is basically an instructor who thought that their class didn't seem to have a lot of diversity. And so we actually talked about what does diversity mean and what does this look like and et cetera. Another example, which I always share for this too, is an instructor who actually said, this form, it didn't help me at all. And we were just like, okay. So they were very negative about it. So it brought down that score. And I was like, what's going on there? Why is this form so problematic? Because we always want to hear that. We want to hear the problems, right, with these things. That's why we're doing the research. That's why we're trying to, do something good here. And so then I go and I look at their student responses, and their students were the most positive of all of the instructors about the instructor implementing the form. So even if the instructor doesn't recognize the fact that this is important to our students, it signals that they care. It signals that they're trying, to think about them in an inclusive way. Sometimes their students will notice, right? And it's a big deal. So I thought that was quite interesting. We also asked the students about it. Again, this was anonymous. 90% were comfortable, some to strong agreement here. 80% recommended that their other instructors use it, and 81% said it gave them an opportunity to share things that they normally would not. So I bring this up because when we think about these innovations, when we think about implementing things, we need to look at what's going on, like the data. Is it really doing what we want it to do? So for this particular form, we did see that. And I've seen that, multiple times in interacting with our instructors. So that said, when we think about inclusive innovation, we've already tied in a couple of big things here. We're centering learning and engagement. Okay, so that's one. And then we're also really thinking about who our learners are. And that's all going to impact, how we're actually carrying this out. We'll get a little bit more concrete in a minute. So the next thing, and the third thing in my framework, is co-create with students and invite their feedback. I know people are scared sometimes to get student feedback. Student evals, But I'm talking about a different kind of feedback. So when we're thinking institution-wide, if we're going to implement something across a system, an institution, right? And even thinking about SUNY here, we can actually ask students. So when you actually think of a policy or, some kind of innovation that you're going across, did you ever ask your students? Did you ask the student groups kind of their perceptions of it or what they might be experiencing? That's critical. In addition to committees, like, do we add students on our committees to ask them for some of their feedback? We don't have to take it all, but we really should be listening to students in this. They're going to be implicated. Do we do focus groups, surveys, et cetera? So some of the innovations that we've done, we survey our students, right? We surveyed our student population about generative AI. We want to know how they're using it, what they're using. We're going to use that as information to really think about what innovations we design with regards to generative AI. We need student voice. In addition, at the departmental level, thinking about curriculum, have you ever thought about involving students as consultants for this work? Okay, so thinking about like those students who really could give you some really good feedback on this, what do they think about some of these innovations? And as I mentioned earlier, we use a lot of student pedagogical partners. I train them on how to give feedback, observation, et cetera, of teaching. And they can have some really amazing insights into the work of instructors. They love it. Our instructors always say, my student partner was fabulous. They gave me so much feedback that was really helpful for my course. So we need to involve our students there, student groups within a discipline. And in our individual courses, we can get a lot of information on our courses. Some people don't like to get informal feedback. It's actually so much better if you can get it formatively, because you can make change, or not, depending on the feedback. But just asking students, how's this going informally, et cetera. We actually see that in some of our work and in our study for students, where one example is a student who the instructor, they came a little early in a lab. And the instructor was basically like, what do you think of this? This is what I'm going to go through today. And asking the student, involve the student in this. And they were like, oh, this is really interesting. I'm getting a sense of like what my instructor is actually doing. They thought that was inclusive to them, right? That's inclusive. That's including students in this as well. Of course, our midterm feedback, and as I mentioned, pedagogical partners. So when we think about innovation, we really do also need to seek student perspectives. We need to co-create with them in some way. So I'll share a couple of perspectives, just a few. There's so many quotes throughout the book. It's hard to just like pick out one or two. But this example, ungrading. I don't know anyone here ungrade? Anyone use it? Okay, so some people so my science teacher set up the course using ungrading and then asked our thoughts and feelings on this. So they again invited feedback, okay? Another example, I ask students about their experiences with the course material. I check in with students regularly to get feedback on how to improve teaching. Whether you've been teaching for 1 year or 30 years, getting feedback is critical. If we're also thinking about ourselves, ongoing growth mindset as teachers, as educators, we are still learning with our students, right? And we see that here with all the technologies that are changing the way that higher education even works. We need to be learners just like our students and gather their essential feedback. So that said, here were the approaches that we just kind of highlighted, and we're going to get into another reflection. So the first thing is, again, center student learning, be responsive to who learners are, and co-create and invite their feedback. I'll give you one example before we reflect. So I don't know if anyone's heard of the computer science course at Harvard, but it's a CS50 course, and it's Introduction to Computer Programming. So students can come into this course with a variety of backgrounds on programming. They don't have to know, how to do it, basically. So in this particular course, they did something really innovative. So what did they do? And it makes sense. It's computer science, right? So as well. But they created a chatbot, and this chatbot was called the CS50 Duck. This chatbot was basically designed to serve as kind of a personalized tutor for the students, right? To be able to help them when they get stuck with code. And they'll say that it doesn't give us just the right answers, but it helps guide us towards these answers. So they implement this particular chatbot, right? And you can actually look up the article if you'd like as well. And when they did that, they got feedback from students and they said they loved it. They loved this course. Even though the chatbot wasn't 100% accurate, right? It was very helpful for them. They could access it at any time, you know, whenever they were stuck, in the middle of the night when they can't get you as a professor, right? Like to actually respond back to them. It was great, right? So they actually published this little initial kind of article teaching CS50 with AI that you're all absolutely welcome to read to hear a little bit more about it. I bring this up as an example of an innovation and thinking about applying this framework. So if we look here, they centered learning and engagement. This chatbot was all about students giving access and helping them learn, right? And engaging them in this new way, right? And so what we're seeing now is the emergence of more chatbots and thinking about courses, et cetera. But that was centering student engagement. They were responsive to who their learners were. So if you think about who takes this course, it's any student. They didn't have to have programming experience. This chatbot is designed intentionally for wherever you are at, right, in terms of your experience level, to support the students in taking this course. So it was very they were very thoughtful and inclusive in how they designed it. And they designed it in a way that the students felt like, oh, it's not just giving me the answer, it's guiding me, right? Because we want students to learn how to do programming. And then lastly, co-creating with learners and inviting feedback. I just told you, they just did a little study on that, right? They figured out what were their responses of their students, right? They got feedback on them. And of course, it's been pretty positive. I'm sure they'll keep revising the chatbot, et cetera, over time to make it even better. But that's a great example of really thinking about innovation, right? And thinking about it in ways that are inclusive and applying all of these dimensions of the framework. That said, we're going to move to another application. So now that we just talked a little bit about the level of a course and going all the way up to institution, I'd like you to think about one teaching and learning innovation. It could be something even you learned at this conference or have been thinking about. So something that you have implemented, maybe you want to implement, or maybe if you support instructors, something that you've seen, them be interested in implementing. I'd like you to actually think through this framework and how you can think about inclusivity with regards to that particular innovation. All right, so I'll give you a few minutes to do that, and then we'll come back and we'll also take some time to share. So you can either talk to someone next to you, or if you can reflect quietly, okay, on this. I'll give you a few minutes.
Yeah, I don't do that.
Thank you for coming, Tracie.
Oh, absolutely, it's my pleasure.
I
Yes.
know you by reputation,
Oh,
only Mrs.
great.
Stevens.
Oh,
Big
nice to
fan of
meet you. Oh, good, yes. Tuk, tuk. Thank you, yeah, absolutely. Nice to meet you.
All right. Okay, so the New York Times, okay. Have to get so that it was accessible, or individuals that. It was, and then also respond to it in a way that, is popular, or they should be able to understand it.
Related.
Yes. The one thing that feel like I kind of.
Thank you for all of your help. Yes. Yes. Everything is so easy, though. It's gone like so smooth, the technology.
What they laughed at, didn't know what they were doing
The
anyway.
who's in class? Yes, it is actually. Yes, yes,
So having to see what.
sure. Yeah, there's a link to on the reference list. So just look for that. There's an article that says the who's in class one. Look for that. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Oh, great, great. Excellent. Oh, good, good.
I mean,
Yeah, yeah. It's really helpful to really, get a sense. Yeah, yeah.
Nodding along.
Sure, sure. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I've seen some when it first came out too, a lot, like some department-wide implementations of it, which I thought was really interesting. Like they coordinated it for multiple courses too. Because I know people had said like, oh, what if you, had it and a lot of people are using it and the students are taking it multiple times. Right, so some have thought about coordination, but yeah.
you know,
Part of like a senior seminar for all seniors.
Uh-huh.
every
Where
time
they have to reflect, and so many of them, they have to, like, have to have a part for working a job.
Sure,
Have to fit.
absolutely,
If I had known this is.
absolutely. Yeah, yeah.
This is good.
Oh, good, good.
Hi, Chair.
Great, great.
We need to plug this in.
Excellent, excellent. Uh-huh.
we rarely.
So did you see the reference list at the end? At the end of the presentation? There's a reference list and it says, it's called the Who's in Class form. I hope I put it in there. I think I did. If I didn't, I'll. If you keep going.
Right?
References, reference list. It's not on there? If not, you just look up the Who's in Class form. The Who's in Class form. It's the same title as in the slide.
Incredibly different.
So I wonder why that one got dropped. That's weird. Because I thought I had a reference list.
If you have a.
It's no problem. Okay, so we'll do like 30 seconds, 30 seconds. And then just if you can wrap up your conversations, that would be great.
Not a primary skill. It's something that afterward I could have done much better. And that's fine. I think it is all about better. Obviously, there's more room for that in EL because there's more also you figure out who your class is. Good stuff like this. If I feel better, this doesn't press me, what can I do?
Okay, let's come back together. All right, so I'd like to see if we could, thank you. I'd like to see if we can hear from a few about applying this framework. Does someone have an interesting thing they talked about? It could be anything with regards to an innovation, things that have gone on. Maybe we'll focus this side. Somebody on this side? An inclusive innovation and applying this framework. What did you discuss? Love to hear something. Volunteers. Nobody wants to talk about their innovations. Innovations. All right, well, I see a hand over here, so let's go over here. And if you could use the mic, that would be great. And I should have mentioned this before, but if you can say also what institution you're from, that'd be great.
Yeah, hi, I'm Ali Ibrahimi from SUNY Old Westbury. And I'm listening to all these, is great, and I want to see how I can implement it. I came out with idea of including all students by way of a classroom timing, instead of having focus with the entire curriculum and dividing it into sections of the time. Let's say I have 10 minutes for each topic, because the new generation, they have focus problem. They cannot listen 20 minutes or 30 minutes or 1 hour to one topic. So I break it down into 10-minute session. And the first 10 minutes, let's talk about anything we want. A word of the day, although the curriculum is set what we need to talk on that 2 weeks module. So dividing it into 10 topics per day, let's 10 minutes or whatever we have. And let's talk about 10 minutes. Let's get into it, everyone. And everybody talks, it will be as attendant.
No,
That's
that's great. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. Great. Yeah, and it gives students some choice, right? And they can actually have some time to just like share some things to kind of get into it. You're actually kind of like scaffolding into it. So thank you for sharing that. Great. And so thinking about the framework, you know, you're also considering your students, you're learning how they're bringing them into it. You're considering different aspects of thinking about their diversity in terms of how long can they, you know, how long is it that they can sustain these kind of engagements? And in addition, you know, maybe you've gotten some feedback from them. You asked them about like what they thought of it, or maybe they've given you some informally, you know, on that. So thank you for sharing. All right, let's see. Another example, innovations. Yes.
This is working, right? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
I hear you.
Well, we were discussing different ways in which kind of more frequent check-ins can improve learning experiences. Gloria was talking about using group projects and the challenge of getting students to take ownership of their roles. Like, does the instructor assign them? Do they discover what they are, et cetera? And I don't do much group work, but I drew a parallel to research papers where I think fewer students are prepared to like do something over 10 weeks without some scaffolding.
Yeah,
But that can be a really productive experience and a chance for me to get to know them better and have a conversation. So I've implemented check-ins like every 2 weeks or so. Tell me about a source that's really useful for you. Tell me about something you're thinking of dropping or that you don't think is very good. And that helps me as a history instructor and get them to think very critically about the sources they're using for their papers. So yeah, just this principle of, I guess it's not like any whiz bang, you know, technological thing, but just more frequent direct engagement with each other, which sounds like the simplest thing in the world, but it can become very easy to forget that with the sweep of time and assignments.
Absolutely.
Can work in different settings.
Yeah, no, thank you absolutely for sharing that. Absolutely on target with thinking about your students and who they are, right? And in terms of also, you know, thinking about group projects and also, as you mentioned, these research papers, we just did a study actually on group work and how to create it more inclusive, equitable group work experiences. We actually created a resource to empower students towards that because they don't always learn the good practices from organizational psychology and all the fields we know about what makes an effective team, right? And so I think these types of things are really important to really think about, right, when we're innovating as well. All right, well, thank you for sharing some of the things that you've been working on and discussing them a bit. So to kind of bring this back, we really need to really think about with any innovation, who could be excluded, right? We need to think about that. We need to think about how do we design for inclusion? And hopefully through some of the examples that we gave today and we talked about, when we think about these innovations, whether they're technological or low tech, whatever, you know, it doesn't matter. We're talking about any activity, you know, that we're trying to actually create a more inclusive atmosphere. So I wanted to share a couple of things. So these are some of the references that I did, that you're absolutely welcome to access that I did talk about today. And I also wanted to share a couple more things that we've been doing in our work. So one is on the protocol for advancing inclusive teaching efforts. So this is actually published in kind of like a methods research when we actually created it. I actually co-created it with students. You'll see themes here. But also in our book, Enhancing Inclusive Instruction, we talk a little bit more about that. And by the way, I'm giving out, the reason why I'm showing this is because I'm going to give away 5 of them. I have 5 free copies for y'all. And so in that book, we talk about the PATE. This is a protocol that's really used to really think about what are you doing in class to get data-driven feedback. We've done hundreds of observations with this, with instructors, and they've really loved it as a reflective tool. And I'm about to actually propose a multi-site study with the PATE, where it's going to be done at many institutions across disciplines, so we can actually tie it to various student outcomes and you know, and student psychosocial and also various outcomes. So the PATE has a bunch of different codes. These are instructional behaviors that you can kind of see instructors doing. So people get trained on using it in the classroom. And then you get kind of this really nice display either graphical, table, whatever, makes sense of what you're doing in your class. And so if you're goal directed and thinking about inclusion, you can actually think about and get observed one time, another time, and kind of see the change as well. So that's kind of really nice. The other thing I wanted to share is the Inclusive Teaching Visualization Project. So this one really gets into the fact that we kind of we're talking about inclusion and all this, but what does it look like? So we actually created several vignettes, and it ties to this project, the PATE, the protocol, where you can actually look at inclusive teaching approaches and kind of think about them and reflect on your own. So feel free to go to that as well. And then also my newsletter, okay? So feel free to subscribe to that in addition. So when we think about inclusive innovation in general, we're always on a journey. And so I always mention this, that we never stop learning, we never stop growing, even if we've been teaching for a long time. So I love this quote from our first book: being an inclusive instructor is an ongoing process and involves learning, mistakes, persistence, reflection, willingness to adapt teaching practices to a diverse student population. So when we're adding any innovation, right, in our course, we really have to think about these things and adapt. We think about our students, who they are, right? We think about learning and engagement. All of these things are going to be critical for us to continue to be successful at inclusive innovation. So that said, I wanted to give some time for questions too. I know we may have some people also online that might want to ask questions. I would love to talk more. There's so much we could talk about with regards to inclusion, but I also wanted to also invite you after this session during the lunch. I'm going to give away 5 of these books and I'll sign them, etc. I'm giving away complimentary, but you're also welcome to go to that as well. So that said, questions. I would love to hear your questions as well at this point in time. Great. Okay. Yes. Hi.
How do we deal with the antagonism toward this approach?
And I'm sorry, who's talking at this point? Oh, there. Okay. Sorry. I thought someone else. Okay. Perfect.
How can we best be equipped to deal with the antagonism to this approach? 2 recent examples: the Baltimore Bridge was struck on Fox News. They blamed diversity and inclusivity for dumbing down the infrastructure maintenance and civil things. During a recent town hall meeting up in Oregon about a diversity, equity, and inclusivity, some of the Zoom callers said DEI means didn't earn it. What do you think would be effective tools for us in engaging that kind of attitude from people? Not that our faculty necessarily have it, but just in case.
Yeah, so I know there's a lot of attacks on DEI, and it's become some, really big kind of thing where it's like evil or it's not working. So one of the things that I always mention here is in terms of these talks is that when we talk about diversity, equity, inclusion, we're talking about inclusive teaching practices. And this is a myth that a lot of people think, and it's unfortunately the people who are not investigating these practices in a substantial way, typically, is that we're not watering our course material down. We're not making anything easy for students. In fact, if we're doing that with regards to inclusivity, we're not actually being inclusive, because we want our students to move on and advance. And higher education is about learning. It's about transformation. So when we talk about inclusive teaching approaches, at no way here did I mention that we're dumbing it down. Okay. So first, I think the idea of misconceptions and myths that people might hold are hard when people are challenged in that, and that they really don't understand. Because usually it's about lack of understanding, right? When these things kind of happen as well. But one of the frameworks that I always use with regards to thinking about it, because I work with people who are all kinds of perspectives, absolutely on this, is that this is good teaching. We're not we're just actually highlighting how we're teaching for our students, and we're being human, and we're teaching for humans in a humanistic way. So if we think about, I know that, thinking about all the digital tools and technologies and that we can't replace humans, Well, at the same time, in our teaching, I think one of the things we can talk about is that it's a very human endeavor. And so the way and things that we're talking about here are really getting to that. And that's our common, like we're all humans. So we're all thinking about each other, right? Like thinking about in the classroom as well. So I think what we really have to move towards is really thinking about what is effective teaching. Is effective teaching only teaching so certain students can learn, right? Is it really? That's, it's not, right? Like, especially if our goal, our mission of our institutions is to educate a diverse student population, then we want to be successful in that, right? Why aren't we aligning our mission, right, with our actions? So I know there's a lot of attack on it. I'll just say, like, misconceptions abound on anything. But if we do this good work, we're going to see the rewards. We're going to see the positive outcomes for our students. And we'll also see, like, this is going to be the way of the future, right? Like with regards to who we are, our student populations. We've neglected it. And I think the pushback has been also because it hasn't been emphasized. It's been like, now it's like, okay, we just tack this on. It's effective teaching. It should be embedded within how we teach. Like, it should be our mindset of teaching. So it's that's a great question. And so those are some of my initial kind of responses and thoughts towards it. But if we can center on the human, and that the teaching, it's very humanistic. We're serving diverse student populations. I think that's going to be important, and what it's not. So also just saying, this is not watering it down. It's not this, it's not that. There's so many misconceptions that we have around this work today. Sure. Yes, in the back. Is it on?
We've noticed some practices in our high school curriculum and college. Two good examples are no due dates. And it's framed as inclusive, like, say, well, a student might be busy now. I'm like, yeah, that's life. And we've seen a trend for the 50-point minimum, where even if a student does not submit an assignment, they're given a 50. Now, in the high school, the teachers hate this. The administration is pushing. At our college, again, I'm reading this up because it's all framed as more inclusive, but I see it as inequitable. And as a business professor, I think it's heresy. Not to take due dates. So that's why I'm here.
Yeah, so with regards to the due date issue, I know that can be quite controversial. Everybody has various philosophies, right? And we're like, okay, some might say, oh, students need to turn things in because that's real life, right? Like, you need to like turn things in on time and things like that. So what I'll say is, for inclusivity for our students in our student study, we did find that they actually do think that flexible deadlines is a more inclusive practice. But I think we have to think about the ways in which it's enacted, because students have to turn things in. They have to complete our classes, right? Like, what are we doing here if we're not going to create an experience for them that they're learning? Some of the work that has been done, a recent study, and people are at various, places with this. And also you have to think about your own philosophies and what you want your, to do in your class. But a recent study actually came out where they did flexible deadlines, where they actually, from the beginning, they said, this is the recommended due date or whatever, and then this is the extension date, okay? And so then they looked at, and they wanted to kind of get a sense of, well, how did the students do with that? Did they all abuse it? What happened, And they found that, it worked just like fine, for the students didn't abuse it more or whatever, most of the students turned things in at their first due date, so they had a lot of really interesting outcomes. So I think what we have to really think about is, yes, flexibility with regards to students' circumstances is always going to be there, right? There's going to be students that have certain circumstances that come out, and we're going to have to think about that, right? Have to think about how to support them. Because if our goal is ultimately that the students are going to complete the class, that they're learning, right? Can we be, kind of flexible in some of these things as well? But at the same time, we also have to acknowledge, as I mentioned, that we need to set deadlines. Like the course is going to be over. The students need to graduate, right? Like all of these things are very realistic things in supporting students. So I think, it's an interesting area where there's a lot of diversity with regards to opinion and thought. But having some flexibility built into the course structure, I think is always a good thing because it acknowledges that life does happen with students, but in ways that are very structured and meaningful and allow students to get it done. We can't, just be flexible and give students free rein about everything, right? Like, because there has to be some structure in the class. I hope that does attend to some of what you asked. Great. And I know you had a question.
So a lot of faculty are focused in these kind of conferences and in our work in general on the act of teaching itself. So I'm wondering what kind of thought or work you might be doing in terms of curriculum development itself being designed. You just mentioned part of the framework, part of the process of the course. How might we look at incorporating inclusivity in terms of how we frame curriculum? And that would also help people who are not trained as teachers to kind of structure into their effort.
Yeah. So curricularly, I think that's a good question. So a lot of the work that I've done with departments on curricular kind of reform has involved student voice. So we will actually hire student consultants who've taken courses or have certain requirements down that they can give good feedback, and they'll be there as well. But at the same time, thinking about an inclusive course design, we have to think about these big frameworks, right? And some of these are coming up in the conference, right? How do we do universal design for learning and things like that? For curriculum, in terms of like how it's integrated, some of the departments have come together to really think about particular courses. For example, the introductory first year principles, gateway, all whatever you want to call them courses, and focusing on them and how to make them more inclusive to their students. I'm hoping I'm getting at some of the things you're trying to, you asked. And so I think we have to think about intentionally, and this gets into a lot of things about thinking about inclusion. What is the material? Does it resonate with students in our audience? And attend to what we're trying to accomplish for our class, for our discipline. So focusing on content, absolutely, but also thinking curricularly, pedagogically, what do we want students, to kind of get out of that experience? Are we going to do, group work, et cetera? What other skills are they trying to build in an equitable and inclusive manner? I think we also have to think about our grading and assessment. How do we, assess students, and what do we believe about thinking about grading? Right now, there's been a lot of moves to really think about, is the way we grade traditionally in higher education the best way? A lot of people are pursuing alternative kind of grading methods and assessments as well. Of course, right now, generative AI is big, so we're going to have to continue to think about that in our curriculum. I know we had some conversations earlier about like disciplinary contexts. Are we going to think about applications to disciplines with regards to generative AI? Are we going to embed those things, within our curriculum as well? So there's these big questions, we can ask around those things, but also the very fundamentals of course design and building for inclusion, right? So thinking about who our students are and making sure that we give choice, there's student agency, also all of these good practices that resonate with building a more inclusive course design. All right. And I know we're at time, but maybe we'll do one more.
Thank you. So real quick, one of the things that, this is great, and I really appreciate all the advice. I think that one of the challenges of including students and including student voice and teaching courses, designing courses, is that for some faculty, especially contingent faculty, untenured faculty, minoritized faculty, BIPOC faculty, it may make them vulnerable or make them feel vulnerable and, possibly, there may be some contention with students that may affect their continued employment. So what would be your advice to faculty who maybe fit one of those categories to sort of help them deal with potential conflicts when they're and they open up their course to student voices and student input.
Yeah, we all know the challenges with student course evals, right? So, we absolutely in higher education need to really think carefully about how we get feedback. There's a lot of problems to that. And this is actually one thing in this book that I proposed. This is why I'm a big fan of student pedagogical partners, because students are trained. They're trained by us, Centers for Teaching and Learning, to really think about giving feedback, to really think about what's good teaching. And then they're incorporating their voices amidst knowing and being coached on that very process, right? So to me, any instructor, regardless of thinking about their identities, can benefit greatly from that. And I've definitely seen that in my work with instructors and working with student pedagogical partners. The other thing is student pedagogical partners, so diverse in terms of their backgrounds. So this is the beauty of it all, right? Like the students should be diverse in terms of who's giving that feedback, and it's richer. It's not anonymous. The students can't hide behind, I value anonymity, right, in many ways, but this is really constructive feedback on teaching and courses. So this is a bigger question, I think, to really think about in higher ed. How do we evaluate teaching, and how do we get formative feedback? Where we're sitting is in a formative space. So I'm more pro doing it in ways that, students can give that feedback in a formative manner, and it's in a way that they are able to do, and it can support instructors. So for the course, for colleagues from marginalized backgrounds, we actually have a chapter of that in our book. And we actually talk a little bit about some of the things that you can do to really make sure, because there's all this documentation of effective teaching, et cetera, but documenting it. Documenting what you do. That's why we do these protocols and things like that. You're doing good practices in your classroom. These are research and evidence-based. Document that. And some of our instructors will take the PATE and some of the things that they've used, and they'll use it in their materials and in their reflections. So having that documentation, I think, is huge. I think this is also a call for our departments and programs to really understand the experiences of instructors who do not share their identity backgrounds. And I've seen that a lot in our colleagues, where they really want to know that, some things happen with me that might not with you in this course and how I'm teaching it. And it's because of bias. It's because of things that we're experiencing. So I think we really need to educate ourselves on the diversity of experiences of instructors and be advocates and allies. And there's certain things, it's just that's just, it doesn't make any sense, right? And just understanding that and being supportive of our colleagues in those positions. They really need our support, I think, is a big thing. But also we need to have good ways to measure and evaluate it that do not, everything's going to be biased in some way, right? Because it's people, but that actually are more holistic, and they center what they're doing. This is why we have these beautiful things like the PATE, because it's what the instructor is doing. It's what they're doing. I'm making a kind of judgment of what they're doing, but it really is what they're doing. Are they, using growth mindset language? Are they doing active learning, right? There's some judgment there, but it's less bias, right? It's just telling them what they're doing. So we need more tools like this that really give evidence linked to research-based practice. That's why we do this research, right? We want to know it works. And that, I think, is even more solid for all of us, right? To document that regardless of our backgrounds. All right, well, thank you all so much for engaging with me. Enjoy the rest of the conference.
Thank you, Dr. Addy. Hold on, hang on.